Good evening, everyone. Hi, and welcome to IVF webinars by Egg Donation Friends. I'm Sophie, and I hope you can hear me. So just let me know in the chat section if you can hear us and if everything is working fine. Oh, thank you, Clary. I can hear you. Good evening. I will be your host today, and today we are here together with Jennifer J. Palumbo, freelance writer, infertility and women's rights advocate, former stand-up comic, author of the blog The 2-Week Wait, and proud IVF mom. And today's topic is the patient's inside story. What can I do to help my chances? And Jennifer will tell us more about her experiences, fun facts, and those not so funny at all. And after Jennifer's presentation, we will start Q&A session. So if you have any questions, you can type those questions in the chat section already now. And before Jennifer will start, I will just remind you that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available to watch on our website tomorrow. So that's it from me for now. So Jennifer, if you are ready, let's do this.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. The big thing for me is not to curse. Because when it comes to infertility, as I was telling Sophie, it's hard not to curse. But I really do want to thank everyone for joining. Infertility sucks. And I want you guys to know that this is going to be informal. I want it to be supportive. And I want you to feel comfortable as we go through this and talk about things. It is basically not only my own patient journey, but I didn't want to mention company names, but for many years I worked directly, they call it D2C, direct to consumer, and I've talked to patients both through advocating, but through working for a company called Fertility Authority, where I literally talked to patients across all of the world for, oh God, almost 10 years, and have gotten to hear recurring themes and even fun questions. And I can share some of those with you as well. But some of what you may hear, you may even be like, well, duh, I knew that. However, there's some things that shockingly people aren't aware of. So some things may not be new to you, some things may be new to you, but overall, we're going to try to just hit on some of the main points. But I hope at the end you feel empowered to kind of take more of an active role in your fertility experience, in your IVF journey. But more than anything, the thing I really just want you all to know, because I didn't know it when I was going through my fertility journey, is infertility is a medical diagnosis, whether insurance wants to acknowledge that or not. You've done nothing wrong. It is not a punishment. It's not a statement on who you are. It is a medical condition, just like diabetes or epilepsy or anything else. And I think the more we realize that, again, it is not a personal statement on who we are, it is a medical diagnosis, the more we can start really advocating for ourselves, doing the research that we need, start really kind of holding our doctor's feet to the fire and being like, okay, hey, let's talk about it. You know, have we tried this? Have we tried this? Have we tried this? And advocating for ourselves. So let's dive in. Okay. Here we go. A little bit about me. And let me acknowledge my patient experience is not nearly as bad as many out there. But the thing that's annoying about me, there's a lot of annoying things about me, but my diagnosis was unexplained infertility, which is so frustrating because you have no idea what the heck is preventing you from getting pregnant. For me, everything came in threes. So I had 3 years of trying to conceive, 3 IVFs, but I had 6 timed cycles with Clomid. Clomid for me was the devil. I saw double. I had hot flashes. I literally actually made my husband cry at a diner. It's the only time I've ever done that was on Clomid. I did 3 inseminations that all happened to be holiday themed. I don't know why. One was Thanksgiving, one was Christmas, one was Valentine's Day, which was not romantic. Again, I did 3 IVFs. I am going to talk a little bit about finances because that is a big challenge. My first IVF was covered by insurance. My second was a clinical trial, which was slightly insane because it was free, but I literally was injecting myself with something I had no idea what it was, but I did it because it was free. And then my last IVF was completely my entire savings account. My parents gave me some money and my sister gave me some money. So it was like almost like a crowdsource funding IVF. Every IVF I had, pretty much, I would have like 13, maybe 10, 13 eggs, but I would only ever have one embryo. Again, no explanation why. So I'd have all these eggs and one embryo, which is better to have one embryo than no embryo. But, when you pay that much money, you expect to have more. You're like, I paid for more. So on the last IVF, we literally had no money, no insurance. My husband and I were truly on the verge of killing each other. It was like the lowest point in our marriage. And everything was riding on this one embryo. By the way, if you look to the right, you see I have a fun little blog piece about the importance of getting bikini wax before each IVF, which I highly recommend, because when you've got guests coming over, you want to clean up. Anyway, so last IVF, one embryo, and through what I can only say is amazing luck, that was my son, Michael, which is the embryo that could. So here's Michael next to the one embryo. It was an 8-cell embryo. And this was before really genetic testing. Genetic testing existed then. It was before PGS, or what they now call PGTA. It was definitely around PGD. But at the time, they didn't recommend genetic testing if you only had one embryo, because what the hell? I mean, you were still going to transfer it. Still, it's the one embryo that implanted and stuck around. He's now 7 years old. Since then, I've become very active in writing about infertility. And the reason I share that is because when I was in the trenches, I was very depressed. I could not get out of bed. I was not social. I was definitely not myself. And I firmly believe I couldn't have been as open about my infertility journey or even advocated for infertility while I was going through treatment. I have tremendous respect for people who can. I don't think I could have done it. The reason I do it now is because I know that somewhere there's someone like me who's in bed getting their period, who's depressed after another failed cycle. And even though my family building journey has ended, I kind of feel like now I'm in a place to do that for the person who can't. So that's why now I talk about my uterus all the time and my crappy eggs, basically. The big thing that I do is advocate for access to insurance. Recently, I know there's people all over the world right now, some in the UK, some in the US, but recently where I live in New York, we just passed a bill that helps cover IVF and fertility preservation for cancer patients. That literally just happened 2 weeks ago. And that's something that we advocated hard for. And every May we go to Washington, D.C. to try to create more insurance coverage across the United States. So again, as I mentioned, the World Health Organization recognizes infertility as a medical disease, but in the UK, in Canada, in the US, it's actually a piece I'm working on right now, the lack of coverage for infertility is a problem. And as I'll talk about later, it's really, really frustrating, because when you are not going to typically get pregnant on your first cycle, which we'll talk about, when you are now being charged so much money and you can't afford it for treatment that you need, it can add to your stress, your self-esteem, and certainly affect your relationship. Okay, so infertility, the basic data, and again, this is the boring stuff. I'm not going to really harp on this because this is not going to help anyone, but it's good to know that you're not alone. So again, this is basic data, basically from the United States. Again, infertility is a disease or condition of the reproductive system. I mention this again because I was raised Roman Catholic. I'm sort of an ex-Roman Catholic, but you basically believe everything is your fault. I thought, as an Italian Roman Catholic, someone was going to sneeze on me and I was going to get pregnant. I literally thought, like, the first month we were going to try to conceive, I was going to get pregnant, no problem. The more I really started to accept that it was a medical issue and not me being punished for something I did, it was helpful to me. The more I was like, wait a minute, this is a medical issue, not a personal statement. it helped me cope better. So again, the World Health Organization sees it that way. It is a medical issue. I can't stress that enough. In the US, it affects 1 in 8. I think outside of the US, statistics range from like 1 to 6, 1 to 5. In terms of pregnancy loss, that's 1 to 4. So that's extremely common. And according to the CDC, 7.4 million women experience some sort of infertility services in their lifetime. Another statistic that I do think it's really important to mention, we're going to touch on this again a little later, is 1/3 of infertility is attributed to women and 1/3 is attributed to men. I cannot tell you how many times I have talked to people where the male partner is not even tested. Historically, sometimes they immediately just focus on the women. If you're in a relationship with a male partner, don't let them get away with that. Make sure at some point that you're both tested. More and more, there's more and more studies about male factor infertility. There's just too many stories I've heard, I'm telling you, it's really bad, where they're doing all this treatment and the man hasn't even been tested. There could be a sperm issue, some sort of hormonal issue with the male. So it's important when you get a fertility assessment or a fertility workup that both are tested. And again, something that's kind of comforting, especially if you're in the beginning of your journey, is sometimes you don't actually always need IVF. Sometimes there can be things like laparoscopy or even just, if you have endometriosis, there can be other measures taken, PCOS. It depends on your diagnosis. So sometimes you don't always need medical intervention, but still, it's good to get a doctor's insight. Okay, so this is where we get into some of the things where you're going to be like, well, duh. And then other things you may not know. So I cannot tell you how many times, either on Twitter or I've talked to a patient or it's come up where someone is cycling over and over again fertility treatment with an OBGYN. What kills me especially is if they're over 40. If they're like over 40 and they're doing Clomid cycles with their OBGYN, I typically stage an intervention. OBGYNs can be great with initial fertility assessments, but if you're having like recurrent miscarriages, and recurrent miscarriages are defined by the American Society of Reproductive Medicine as 2 or more, or if, again, you fall within the guidelines of you're under the age of 35 and you've been trying to conceive for over a year, or you're over the age of 35 and trying to conceive for 6 months, you need to see a reproductive endocrinologist. I can't stress that enough. And again, some of you may be like, well, duh, but truly, this just happened 2 weeks ago where I was talking to someone on Twitter and she's been having so many miscarriages. And I said something like, well, did you ask your RE, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, what's an RE? And it turned out she was seeing an OBGYN. I almost lost my mind. So really though, if any of you are seeing your OBGYN and you fall within those guidelines, see a reproductive endocrinologist. Clomid comes up a lot. And I actually posted this weekend about the webinar on Facebook. If you want, you can stalk me. And I mentioned about Clomid, and people were like, oh my God, actually, is there a limit on Clomid? Clomid is like a first line of defense. And so it is common that you would start taking Clomid, but there really are guidelines to how long you should be on it and how many cycles that it would be effective. It really does depend on your age and your diagnosis. So I can't necessarily give you like a total blanket statement, but as you look on the slide here, 3 to 6 Clomid cycles are recommended before moving on to another form of treatment. That's like a general rule of thumb, but they do recommend if you're on it for like more than 6 months, it's not good. It's not recommended. It can cause issues with your cervical mucus. It can also possibly cause I think fibroids. It's just not a wise idea, particularly if you're over the age of 40. They don't recommend Clomid at all. So if your doctor has you on Clomid for a prolonged time, you definitely may want to talk to them about it and think about moving on to something else. As we just mentioned, in terms of recurrent pregnancy loss, this also comes up a lot too, especially if you follow celebrities. Carrie Underwood, Gabrielle Union, Courtney Cox all recently have opened up about having like 8 or 9 miscarriages. I love when celebrities are open about pregnancy loss because it's a topic that isn't necessarily talked about enough, but that's not normal. That's not a good thing. If you're having 8 or 9 miscarriages, something is not right. It's very common to have a pregnancy loss, to have like 1 pregnancy loss. But if you're having more than 2 or 3, something's going on. It could be an autoimmune issue. It could be an endocrine issue. You could have a uterine issue where maybe it's misshapen. Most miscarriages are attributed to chromosomal abnormality. So again, I've talked to a lot of people who have had a series of miscarriages, and some doctors have been like, oh, it's just bad luck. No. If you're being told that if you've had a series of miscarriages, again, this is an opportunity to advocate for yourself to get additional testing and see what's going on. Again, I mentioned about making sure that both the woman and man, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, are tested. And I joke about this a lot. You're not in a committed relationship with your doctor. You've never married your reproductive endocrinologist. If you are, we can talk about that offline. I'd love to hear it. But you should never be afraid to get a second or third opinion. Some people feel really uncomfortable about that. You're spending a lot of money, unless you have incredible insurance. You should feel really good about the care and the treatment that you're getting. Some people ask, well, how do I, get my medical records? I always used to say, can I have a copy of my medical records for my own file? I just want to have it at home so I can, have it at home to keep track of everything. And then take it to another doctor. If the doctor's really good, they'll get that you want a second or third opinion. That's what you do. It's really okay. You never know what a pair of fresh eyes is going to see on your case. It's just too big of a deal not to get someone else's opinion. They may suggest a new protocol. They may suggest something that really resonates with you. And you can't think about someone else's feelings, especially your doctors, for crying out loud. They make enough money. Don't worry about it. You need to advocate for yourself and put yourself first, and certainly getting pregnant first. Okay, continuing on. If you're in the US, a lot of people don't realize this, and you're over the age of 42, a lot of clinics have cutoff ages if you want to use your own eggs. They do this for several reasons. Some of them actually genuinely care, and they just don't want to put you through treatment if they feel like you're not going to be successful, because the success rates are lower when you're using your own eggs over the age of 42. Some, to be perfectly honest with you, don't want it to impact their success rates. So if you are over the age of 42, you're in the US, you want to use your own eggs, just be aware that there are clinics that will see you. It just is a little less of a pool than maybe you would hope. So definitely do your research before going to see a doctor and having them tell you while you're in the office that they wouldn't cycle you. If you want, you can find me offline and I can actually tell you which clinics they are. Success rates come up a lot. A lot of people are like, oh, what are the success rates? I'm all about success rates. Again, given what I just told you, they're a tool to use, to be aware of, but some clinics don't see certain patients because they feel it'll impact their success rates. So while they can be informative, I wouldn't necessarily live or die by them. I think that's the nicest way I can put that. Just a, again, patient to patient inside scoop on that. Shared risk, cashback, IVF multi-cycle programs. If you've ever looked at any of those, here's how that works. Basically, you have to qualify for those. In order to qualify, you have to have a certain AMH level, or you have to be a certain age, or you have to be a certain BMI. An AMH, if you don't know, is an anti-Müllerian hormone, and that basically gives insight into your egg quality, your ovarian reserve. So in order to qualify, basically what they're saying is, we'll know whether or not this patient has a good chance of getting pregnant. So the odds are kind of in their favor. Again, not all shared risk and cashback IVF multi-cycle programs are like this. Not all. That's why I said ask a lot of questions. But some of them kind of won't accept you if they know they're going to have to give you money back, basically. So make sure if you're going to pursue some of these programs, you really read the fine print, you really know what you're getting into, because basically they may just accept you because they know they're not going to have to give you money back. Again, kind of blunt, ask a lot of questions, know what you're getting into. Another inside tip. There are times where I've talked to patients where, I'll give you an example here in New York. It's actually where I cycled, Cornell, Weill Cornell. I actually cycled a few places, but Weill Cornell is one of them. So there may be a doctor there, say Dr. X, who you are dying to see, but they're booked out for months. And you're going to wait to see them because they're just booked up. But with university-based practices or with clinics where there are a lot of doctors on staff, depending on where your cycle falls, you actually end up seeing everybody. So my doctor, while she organized my protocol, my retrieval, I saw Dr. A, and then my transfer, I ended up seeing Dr. B. So my advice is, if you are going to a clinic where there's a bunch of people on staff, you don't necessarily want to hold up your treatment or consultation waiting for one doctor, because you're probably going to get the benefit of all of them anyway, and you're probably going to see all of them anyway because of the way the clinic is designed. So don't hold up your treatment, make an appointment with someone, because you will get the benefit of the team. God, I hope that makes sense. But it's come up a lot. Certainly NYU is another one. I'm giving New York examples again because that's where I live. But they end up seeing you, whoever is doing retrievals that day or whoever is doing transfers that day, you end up seeing all the doctors from the practice anyway. So I never understood why patients would wait for this one doctor when in reality, you probably get to see them anyway if you just make an appointment with whoever is one of the doctors on staff. Okay. According to the Journal of American Medical Association, the odds of having a baby on your first attempt is 29.5%. Now, if any of you are about to do your first IVF and want to rip through the screen and strangle me, I don't blame you. The reason I put this in here is I actually wish somebody had told me that initially, because I think when you first are going to do IVF, you're like, okay, I'm going to do IVF and it's going to work. If you kind of are aware that the odds are a little low, it can be comforting, because you feel like, at least for me, and hopefully some of you, you feel like less of a failure if it doesn't work on the first try. I remember one of my friends, her brother, she had just done her first IVF and it didn't work. And her brother was like, what do you mean it didn't work? Like, he just didn't get it. Sometimes when people hear IVF, they just think it's going to work, and it doesn't. And so statistically, sometimes it can be a comfort to know that the first IVF doesn't always work. Again, more on this later, but familiarize yourself with all of your options. Double your efforts to keep lines of communication open with your partner. I really think a relationship is like a balloon. And when you're dealing with infertility and IVF and shots and hormones, it's like a weight is sitting on that balloon. And my husband and I had different coping mechanisms. And so it really put a strain on our relationship. So if there's any way you can work out like a fertility-free night, where you don't talk about his sperm count or your cervical mucus or what you're eating and how it affects your fertility, I really recommend it. So that's just my, again, patient-to-patient advice. Now, next slide. So infertility in areas of our life. I'm just taking a quick sip of tea. Bear with me. Look, it's Dr. Seuss tea, by the way. So there's a bunch of areas of our life. We have physical health, personal relationships, friends, family, finances, spiritual, if that's something important to you, your career, and your mental health. The thing about fertility is it impacts all of that, literally. I mean, just to go back quickly, it kind of can affect all of it. Your physical health, your personal relationships, if your friends are having babies or getting pregnant, your friends, your family, if they're asking when you're going to have kids, your finances because you're trying to afford treatment, your spiritual faith because you feel like, why can't I get pregnant? Why is God putting me through this? Your career, quite often, if you feel like you're not focusing on your job, your mental health. And I just think it's important to remember, if you can, that there may be one or two aspects of your life while you're in the thick of this that you genuinely may be succeeding at. It could be, I mean, I know it sounds ridiculous, but like it could be anything. There maybe you are killing it at work. Maybe you are, I don't know, getting in shape. Maybe you have the best friends you possibly could have, or maybe your relationship has gotten stronger because of fertility treatment. I think if there's any way, again, that you can kind of be like, all right, let me look at all the aspects of my life. What area is pretty good, or am I excelling at? You have to try to remember that infertility doesn't necessarily define who you are. You are more than your reproductive organs or IVF. They talk about how they talk a lot about stress and infertility and whether or not it really does affect your chances of getting pregnant. And in this slide, this is through the ASRM, they talk about all these different stress reducing techniques, acupuncture, guided imagery, journaling and blogging. I really did like blogging, going through it. I don't know, honestly, if any of this helped me. I'll be honest with you. What I do think helped me was what I kind of just said, and I talk about in the J personal suggestions, is anytime I was going to go to a social event or see anybody, like my family, or go to a party, I would make a list of accomplishments or even anything I wanted to talk to before a social event, because then you have something to pivot to, or just something to remind yourself that you didn't suck or that you just had anything else in the world to talk about. I don't care if it was like a movie that you liked, a book you just read, that you just hung out. Like for me, I hung out with my gay best friend. We had the best time. We just went to this movie. Just anything else in the world that I wanted to talk about. To write 5 things before I went to a Christmas party really was helpful. I really could not recommend that more, because if someone was like, oh, hey, when are you guys going to start a family? And again, I used to do stand-up comedy. I'd be like, well, we'll let you know, but we just did this amazing show at this club, or, we'll keep you posted. But have you seen that recent movie? My God, it was so amazing. If you have subjects in your head ready to go to pivot to, it really is incredibly helpful. I definitely do recommend, if you can do therapy, even for yourself or couples therapy, I think that's really helpful to have an objective party to talk to. I recommend that, keeping your sense of humor. And I firmly believe in do whatever you need to do to stay sane. I don't care if you buy yourself a lollipop, get a manicure, avoid your mother-in-law for 5 minutes. If it buys you even, I don't care, 10 seconds of happiness, or where you're not thinking about fertility, I believe in that. I could never meditate. I don't think I could ever do yoga. But if any of those work for you, great. But that's why I think it goes back to the do what you need to do to stay sane. I just think sometimes, again, 5 seconds, if you just buy 5 seconds, that can help. Okay, this is the knowing your options section. I talk a lot about, actually, the word empowered is used so much, it kind of gets on my nerves. If we played a drinking game for how many times we heard the word empowered, we'd all be drunk by noon. But in terms of being an empowered patient, I think is really important, because, again, I talk to too many patients that don't know they have certain options that can help them along their treatment. And it's not their fault. It's just, how would you know the questions or the options to ask for unless you actually know the questions and the options to ask for? So here are just a few things that you may want to be aware of. There are other options that may be appropriate for you. I'm not recommending or suggesting any of these. These are just a few things that I wanted to throw out to be aware of, but I definitely think you should do some of your own due diligence and see what might be right for you in your situation, especially given if you have a certain diagnosis, whether it's PCOS or endometriosis or male factor. There's many resources online that you can look at, but here's a couple of ones that I think are compelling. So ESET, single embryo transfer. This is a problem for many people, especially if your finances are limited, because sometimes you think, okay, let me put in as many embryos as possible because I only have state coverage for one IVF. But when you transfer more than one embryo, you're often putting yourself at a higher risk if you're a woman, because you can have preeclampsia or high risk pregnancy. Also, quite often, if you're pregnant with twins or triplets, they can end up in the NICU. That's a possibility. Again, it doesn't always happen. I should mention, in some cases, depending on your age or, again, your diagnosis, they do actually recommend putting in more than one embryo. But again, maybe talk to your doctor about whether or not ESET, again, that's elective single embryo transfer, is something that would be good for you. Freeze all cycles. There's been a recent trend about freeze all cycles in the last, I would say, 2 years. They recommend this. Basically, you would do an IVF cycle, but immediately freeze all the embryos. They recommend this for a few reasons, not just for genetic testing, which is one recommendation, but also they found that it allows the woman's uterine environment, because you've just been taking all these hormones to produce eggs, it allows the uterine environment to go back to its natural state. So I actually thought that was really compelling, because basically you've just been like pumped with all these hormones. It's kind of like, hey, let's just let her chill for a bit. The woman kind of gets back to her typical hormone level, and then they would transfer the embryos back in. Mini IVF, I'll be honest with you, years ago I kind of was very dismissive of this, but more and more they're actually finding, this is becoming more common, especially in the US, they're finding success with this with older women, with women who have PCOS, especially if they have a risk of having OHSS, being over hyperstimulated. If you have low ovarian reserve, because you produce less eggs, but the hope is it's higher quality. So mini IVF might be something to talk about with your doctor. Then there's genetic testing. There's PGD, which they now call PGTM. They just recently changed it. That's if you have like Tay-Sachs or Huntington's disease or sickle cell anemia. But PGT-A, which used to be PGS, is basically an overall screening of your embryo to see if it's chromosomally normal. That's if you've had, I put RPL, but that's recurrent pregnancy loss, if you've had a series of miscarriages. It's typically $3,000, so it's not inexpensive. Insurances typically don't cover it. But again, it may be something you might want to ask your doctor about. If you've had recurrent pregnancy loss, it might be something they may recommend. Just recently, this is very recent, they've been talking about endometrial receptivity tests. There's a few companies that do it. It basically, if you've had genetically tested embryos, but you keep having unsuccessful IVFs, this test tests your endometrial lining and basically tells you when they think is your window of implantation window, like the best time to transfer the embryo so that it has like the optimal time of implantation. Again, these are some new tests that not necessarily, not tests, but these are some new reproductive ideas that you may want to look into if you think it'll fit your situation. Just a few things. Okay, here's the depressing, the depressing slide, which I will just quickly touch on because it's just so depressing. So basically, this is all, I should be clear, all United States data. So even with people with insurance, 47% reported less than half of the cost covers one full IVF. 61% of respondents without IVF insurance paid out of pocket, cost between $15,000 and $30,000 for one cycle of IVF. And then this one I can barely even read because it's so depressing. But if women continue, this is a new study. This is in 2015. Well, not terribly new, but newish. If women continue with IVF, they have a 69% chance of having a baby after 9 IVF cycles. For crying out loud. When I read that, I wanted to drink a bottle of scotch. I mean, my God. even if you could afford 9 IVF cycles, emotionally, do you really? I mean, that's a lot. I mean, some people do it. God bless them. 9 IVF cycles. So basically, this study was like, on average, the process of success for IVF, they recommend anywhere from 6 to 9 cycles, which would take roughly 2 years, which is similar to the rates of couples conceiving naturally taken 1 year. So let's think about this for a second. Most people don't have the coverage for one IVF. They usually have coverage for IUIs. And then this recent study comes out in 2015 being like, hey, most of you don't have coverage for one. And by the way, it's going to take you 6 to 9 cycles to get pregnant. So on that note, I put in this slide of some of my favorite memes because that last slide is so depressing. So let's just take a moment. If you can't read all the memes, I do highly recommend the dentist one on the left because that one's hysterical. That's a dentist waiting room. And it says, I hope my gynecologist won't decide to redecorate with the same concept. Okay. Moving on. Here's what you can do to potentially get IVF covered if you don't have coverage. If you do have insurance through your job, you can speak to your human resources representative and ask them about getting IVF covered, which I know you're thinking you've got to be crazy. But if you go to Resolve, the National Infertility Association site, they legitimately have all this data that may convince your HR department to do it. I touch on it briefly, but they have a whole PDF of research on why a company would actually invest in this, and it actually can save them money in the long run. So I really recommend it. You can advocate for yourself. You can talk to your HR department. If you don't have it through your job, you can reach out directly to your insurance company. Call them. Find out for certain that IVF isn't covered. Request either an exemption of benefits and ask how you can file an appeal to get IVF covered. Again, advocate for yourself, advocate for yourself, advocate for yourself. You can also speak to your doctor and ask if they can write something why IVF is medically necessary for you to have your family. If you do have a diagnosis like what we've been talking about, PCOS, endometriosis, if you medically have something, depending on how, like the CPT code or something like that, it's possible you can get IVF covered. If you're in the US, you can speak to your accountant about whether you can file any IVF treatment or fertility treatment under medical. If you have a flexible spending account or a healthcare savings account, depending on the account, again, I'm so not good with finances, but maybe, again, speak to your accountant about whether or not your FSA or HSA can be put towards IVF. Like myself, again, for my second IVF, ask the doctor or clinic you're with if there's any clinical trials you qualify for that may cover your cycle or your medication. One quick note on your medication that I didn't mention here is sometimes patients donate their medication to clinics. I did after my last IVF cycle, so maybe ask your clinic if they have any donated medication. And again, if you're in the United States, Resolve will be having its annual Advocacy Day, and you're more than welcome to join us. It's May 15th and 16th. I'll be there. So come on down. Here's a bunch of fertility grants information. You can find this online, but there are a bunch of places. In the UK, there's also IVF Babel. I love IVF Babel. Fertility IQ is another place, but here's a whole bunch of places. Again, you can see this again tomorrow. If you want to play it back, Cade Foundation, you can look into all these places and apply for fertility grants. By the way, on the left is a 2-week weight survival kit I made for my friend. There's a water gun in there. I recommend that. That and a princess crown. Okay. Online support. I still am on Twitter. I connect with a lot of people on Twitter. Lifelines has, Fertility Lifelines has a list of infertility support groups that you can find. I have the link there. But definitely if you Google them, you can go to in-person support groups. If you don't want to deal with human people in person, there's a lot of online support groups as well. I started my own Trying to Conceive blog. That was helpful. There's social media that you can connect with people. You can even create an alias if you don't want people to know it's you. So in closing, you're not a bad person for having negative thoughts or saying no to baby showers. I wanted to mention that. Again, that's keeping yourself sane. doing what you need to do to get through it all. You're not a bad patient, or being difficult for asking your doctors questions, or asking about clinical trials, or asking about genetic testing, or getting a second opinion. You are advocating for yourself. You are important. You matter. I can't stress that enough. Again, schedule time where you can be fertility free. I know that's really hard. It was really hard for me. It was on my brain all the time. But I don't know, make it cervical free Fridays. Do what you have to do. And then please feel free to contact me through Twitter, the 2 Week Wait, or Instagram, Jen J. Powell, or my blog, the 2 Week Wait, if you, I don't know, have any questions or just want to say hi. So I hope I didn't talk too fast because I'm in New York and I tend to do that. And I really hope, again, that this was helpful. And if you do have any questions, this is the time. But also, if you have any advice, feel free to chime in, because again, I am one patient. This is one patient experience. And even though between working for certain companies and talking to people over the years, I'm still always learning something. It's amazing. So again, this is an open forum, and I would love to learn as much as I would love to help answer any questions anyone has.
Thank you, Jennifer, a lot for your experiences and sharing those with us. Now we will wait for the questions as they will appear, for sure.
As they roll in.
Yeah. Actually, I have also a question.
Yeah.
Is it difficult to have this kind of healthy distance and perspective to this subject, which is not easy?
Was that a question or a statement?
Yeah. No, actually, you have that healthy perspective. So it's difficult to have, because this is emotional subject, and I think this is very difficult to have this.
I'm a different person than I was going through treatment, and I was really private about it. And I think people don't even, because even, I mean, and if any of you follow me online, you know, I have 2 children now. And some, after I got pregnant with my second child, I kind of had a whole like, well, should I advocate? But it literally was because I thought of how I was when I was trying to conceive, and it took me 3 years. I was not able to be public about it. I was depressed. I was antisocial. And I remember after my first failed IVF, I went back to work. And at the time, literally 3 people were pregnant at my job. And my boss, again, this is just after my first failed IVF. My boss was like, "Can you plan a baby shower for these 3 pregnant women?" And I'm like, for crying out loud. And this woman I worked with had gone through IVF, and she was like, "You know what? I'll plan it. I'll take care of it. I got it." And I thought of that, and I kind of felt like she took the hit for me. And so I felt like now I was going to take the hit for the people who are where I was then. When I go to DC, when I write an article, when I do a webinar, and this is no BS, I know there are women who can't advocate for themselves, and men, and that are depressed, that are exactly where I was then. And I'm now in a place where I'm not hormonal or depressed or taking it personally. And so I'm able to talk about it now. And so I need to do that for the people who can't. And so I think that's why I have a better perspective on it. And now, particularly because I ended up working with clinics and learning so much being on the other side, that's why I ended up learning some of what we talked about. And I was like, well, Jesus, I have to tell patients this. I didn't know that about SART. I didn't know that about university-based clinics. I didn't know that about multi-cycle packages when I was a patient. So that's why I started ending up talking about it. And it is a different perspective.
Yeah.
Sorry. I actually saw some questions.
Yeah, I will display those in a second. So we will all see that.
Oh, question mode. That's fancy.
Yeah. And the first question for you is, did you try different clinics for IVF?
Yes, it's so funny. Such a good question. Thank you. Because I actually tried, you're going to laugh at me. Every single IVF, I went to a different clinic. Every time it didn't work, I'm like, boom, you're gone. I was like so dramatic, because I really am a big believer in second opinions. When the first IVF didn't work, I was like, well, that's it. I'm getting a second opinion. So I got another opinion. And then I literally had like 10 eggs retrieved and one embryo. And I said to the second doctor, because the first IVF, I actually had 2 embryos. It's the only time I ever had 2 embryos. The second doctor, I said, what do you think happened? I only had 1 embryo and all these eggs. And so he's like, just bad luck. And I said, well, what would you do differently? And he said, nothing. I would do the same thing. And I was like, well, that's the wrong answer. And so I went to a third clinic, and she recommended trying Menopur because I was over the age of 35, and she said that sometimes helps patients over the age of 35. She recommended doing estrogen priming, which we'd never done. She recommended different things. And although, to be really transparent with you, I don't know if it actually helped, because I ended up having 1 embryo again, to be honest with you. It still made me feel better to spend the money and to work with her, because we were at least trying something different. So I tried 3 different clinics. I really do believe you should feel good about who you're working with.
And great answer. And the next question. How did you find information about different clinics, about results, and how they felt taken care of?
So literally, while I was doing my clinical trial, this company called Fertility Authority, which is the site's still up, but they're not necessarily still around anymore. They reached out to me to start blogging for them, and then they eventually hired me, and I worked for them for many years. And they eventually actually became a company called Progeny. But I worked for Fertility Authority, and I was the international call center for, like, just me alone for several years. And I started talking to different patients, but I also ended up working with clinics all across the United States. And I got to know doctors and clinics. And I still now, because I work with Resolve a lot for Advocacy Day, I'm on the board of Advocacy Day. And I write about fertility. I interview doctors. I go to the ASRM conferences. I got to know clinics all across the country. And that's how I learned about different clinics. And I was doing like patient doctor matchup. So like I would get a patient say, hey, I'm 42 years old. I want to use my own eggs. What, I have Blue Cross Blue Shield. What doctor do you recommend in California? Or what doctor do you recommend in New York or Texas? So I would call around different clinics to match them up. That was my job at this company. And that's how I learned that some clinics are like, I'm sorry, over the age of 42, we won't see this patient. And I thought it was such a great service, because I would spare that patient from going to the doctor and being told, either you use donor eggs or we're not going to see you. So this is insane, but I have a bizarre amount of knowledge. So like in New York, especially, and basically across the country, but in New York, I know what doctors won't see you and what doctors will. I know which clinics across the United States are LGBTQ friendly. I know, all this bizarre information, because it was a startup company and it was small. And so because that was my job, that's how I really gained all of that information. And because I ended up staying in the space, that's how I learned a lot. And it's funny, because most doctors, they know me, they've actually been quite lovely. So they do end up educating me, and I've learned a lot. And some of the doctors have even shared with me about SART results. Some of them love them. Some of them, there's actually a doctor, I don't want to say who, but there's a doctor who really feels that they are skewed and not fair. And they're trying to advocate for changing how the data is reported, because again, it's not that it's total BS, but there is a way to manipulate it. So that's why I always get a little concerned when patients live and die by them, because I think they're a tool, but I think ultimately you have to trust your gut. I think you need to talk to the doctor and see if you feel good about what they're recommending. I just think patients sometimes don't trust themselves enough, or advocate for themselves enough. But that's how I learned all this information about the different clinics, and even from the doctors themselves.
And thank you for this great insight. And we have now a question. So, Thank you. I'm heading out to Alicante next Friday for my first donor egg transfer. And yes, I did want to reach into the screen and punch you earlier. I do like your suggestion of having fertility free time, but how to do this? How do you do this? It's so hard to switch off. Also, what tips do you have to help you through the dreaded 2-week wait?
Oh my God. Okay, so I love you because these are all really good questions. I can tell you, and you probably know this, but donor egg cycles have higher success rates, though. I think you know this. If you look anywhere, you can go ahead and Google this when you are done. But donor egg cycles they do have higher success rates, especially if you use frozen donor eggs. But they do have higher success rates. So I don't know if those statistics exactly fit your situation. So, but yeah, that cracked me up. Anyway, fertility free time. Yeah, it was really, really hard. But I think even if it's like one night a week or even one meal, I mean, just like one meal. I mean, because my husband and I really were so bad. Like it just totally overtook our lives. But if you're like, okay, one dinner, we will not talk about anything fertility related. Even if you like, again, I'm a firm believer in like index cards and writing topics that you will talk about. And again, like my husband and I both were stand-up comics. We both love movies. We both love television shows. Like even if you have to like do some prep to get through it, I never be like, these are the topics we're going to talk about, or these are the things we're not going to talk about, and try to make it fun. Like get a bell. You can get it from Amazon, and anytime anyone talks about anything fertility, hit the bell. Or you know how they have swear jars? Get a jar and put a quarter in it anytime anyone talks about anything fertility. Like I think you have to think outside of the box. I remember even when we were trying to conceive, because it was getting so boring, we got a hat and put like fun ideas in there. You just think of some way to avoid anything fertility related. Either come up with like get a board game, play the game Monopoly, or anything that's non-fertility. Watch the Golden Girls. I don't care. Like anything. I mean, I don't think the Golden Girls are trying to get pregnant, right? Because they're in menopause. But speaking of the 2-week wait, something that I watched a lot during the 2-week wait that I highly recommend is RuPaul's Drag Race. Ain't nobody trying to get pregnant on that show. It's fabulous. It's fun. They talk makeup. It's drag queens. The Logo channel in general, I don't know if everyone has a Logo channel because it's the gay network, is just great. It's about like the commercials don't even have diaper commercials or pregnancy commercials. It's like plant commercials and pets. So I loved RuPaul's Drag Race. And actually, if you do go online, they have like movies and television shows and stuff that you can find that has no fertility plot lines. So I think the 2-week wait, I don't know if you saw in my slide presentation, I did have a box of a survival kit, and I had like chocolates, a princess crown that you can wear when you're feeling low, a water gun to shoot people for hormonal rages. But I do think anything that you can watch that's not fertility related, again, I really do recommend RuPaul's Drag Race. But I just think for me, the first week was always okay. It was the second week that sucked. I did write something for a site called Pregnantish of bloggers who all weighed in on what you can do to survive the 2-week wait. So I do recommend that because they all weighed in and had advice. But I just think, again, going back to whatever keeps you sane, like whatever you like, a show, a movie, going for walks, it's individual. Anything that keeps you sane, that's my mantra, man. Anything that keeps you sane, do it. It's all good.
Thank you a lot. The next question. For using donor egg, 21 years old, and sperm 29, do you recommend to do PGTA?
Well, donor egg, they usually do a lot of testing on the donor before they would go ahead and use them. So they kind of already done probably all the background testing that they would do in general. I mean, it's definitely a question more for your doctor, but given the donor's age and that they already did all of the background genetic testing on the donor, I don't think it's probably necessary. So, I mean, I would ask your doctor, but it doesn't seem like it would be necessary because they've already done all this testing. But it's funny, they really do. PGTA more and more is becoming like, I don't want to say the big thing. It's just because, again, it's this is where I'm going to do math. What is it? 23 and 23 chromosomes from both the female and the male. And so they're just making sure that it's a total of, oh my God, is it 46? I majored in theater, sociology minor, but they just want to make sure it's chromosomally viable, because when you do PGTA, it has a higher rate of implantation in the uterus and it decreases the chance of miscarriage. And so it really is more, again, for recurrent pregnancy loss, or if you're older, because the older you get, you do have a higher chance of either chromosomal abnormalities or a chance of miscarriage. So in this case, it doesn't really seem like it would be recommended. You can ask your doctor, but my sense is, again, given that it's donor egg, the age of the donor egg is 21, I would guess they would probably say no.
And thank you for the advice. The next question: which research need to do if pregnancy stop at 6-7 week heart not beating?
So I write a lot about miscarriages, because one of the, well, I work for 2 different genetic companies, and miscarriage around 6, well, to be honest with you, in the first trimester is incredibly common, and especially around 6 to 7 weeks. I actually think the most miscarriages in what I've written about is anywhere from 6 to 11 weeks. So it's extremely common. It really depends if it's the only miscarriage you've ever had, if it's like your first miscarriage, or this is something that's happened more than once. Again, if it's the first time or only once, I shouldn't say only once, but just if you understand my meaning in just a second, it unfortunately does happen, and is common. It doesn't make it any less easier. However, if this is something that's been happening on a recurrent basis, if it's more than once, if it's twice or 3 times, it can be different things. It can be an autoimmune issue. It can be an endocrine issue. It can be a chromosomal issue. So if it has happened more than a few times, or if you're concerned about it, you can speak to a reproductive endocrinologist and they can test your hormones. They can do something called an HSG, where they can look at your uterus and your fallopian tubes to see if there's any abnormality with like the shape of your uterus that may be causing a problem. But typically, you know, if it's, again, something that keeps happening, more often than not, it may be a chromosomal issue. So ultimately, again, if it's just a one-time thing, it might not ever happen again. So I'm hoping it's just a one-time thing, because, you know, that's heartbreaking, and it really is such a emotional experience, and they call it an invisible loss, because you know, you get this positive pregnancy test and you get so excited and you start, you know, making plans, and then you have this heart not beating. So I'm so sorry that you went through that. I'm really hoping it's a one-time thing. If it's not, if it happens again, or if this is like the second or third time, definitely see a reproductive endocrinologist and ask for additional testing. There is one other test that you can do. I think it's called products of conception, that may be worth looking into as well. But again, I'm not even sure which company does it. But again, I just think it's a matter of how many pregnancy losses you've had. So if it's more than one, definitely talk to a reproductive endocrinologist.
Thank you for explaining this and the answer. And the next question, How to successfully convince insurance to pay for our IVF. Seems majority insurance company only covers medical prescription.
Yeah, I mean, and it also depends on where you're located. So again, and you can, I think you have access to this tomorrow. We do have that slide. If it's through your company, you can definitely talk to your HR department. If you're in the US, go to Resolve, National Infertility Association. There's this study, it's a PDF study, and it's that they did, I think it's EMD Serono, Resolve. And what they basically are saying to companies, if it's through your job, and I'll be brief in case it's not, is the company actually saves money if they offer IVF coverage, because the employees are not gone as much, because when they have benefits, they are able to make use of it, get pregnant, and then get on with their lives. Basically, if they're struggling to pay for treatment, they're gone more often. They have bad feelings towards their company. They switch jobs because they go to maybe work for another company that has better fertility benefits. And like I was saying before about single embryo transfer, this is something I actually talk about a lot. When you have a company with benefits, okay, you can then do single embryo transfer, which actually saves the company money. Because if you transfer more than one embryo and then you have a high risk pregnancy, your employee is out more, or they end up having babies that are in the NICU, and then the company has to pay for the high risk pregnancy and the babies being in the NICU. But if your company covers fertility, covers IVF, they actually save money, because then that employee can have a safer pregnancy and they save on NICU costs. So that's basically the pitch for why companies would offer fertility benefit. If your company does not have any fertility benefits and your insurance is just independent, again, you can file an appeal. You can ask for an explanation of benefits and really read the fine print. You can ask your doctor to write a letter of why it's medically necessary for you to have IVF. Sometimes that does actually work. But you can call them and ask for it, like, how do I appeal this? It really does also depend on, again, if where you're located. If you're in the US, certain states cover IVF. And if they don't, right now, like for example, if Texas right now, I'll just use it as an example. This morning, literally this morning, if you Google it, had a hearing about whether or not they were going to make a move to start covering IVF. So if you're in the US and you're in a certain state, you might want to see if they're actually trying to push to cover fertility coverage, because right now it's happening across the US. So you might want to actually get involved in advocating for that. If you're outside of the United States, I know in the UK right now, they're pushing about the IVF postcode. Like, there are actual movements to try to get coverage. But just to stick to your question, my advice, again, to review, is file an appeal, see if your doctor can write you a note saying why it's medically necessary, or again, see if it is through your company, talk to your HR department and see if they can work out something to add it to the benefits. Maybe even try to talk to other employees if they have fertility coverage. I'm sorry, if they need fertility coverage as well.
We have an additional information that.
Oh, you're in Canada. Canada is weird in terms of fertility benefits. I actually did research on Canada. Because I know, isn't it like you need an age requirement? And then I think you have to prove that you've done IUI, right? And because I actually did some research recently on this. Again, I'm writing an article about this. But again, I think it also does depend on whether or not it's through your company or if it's independent insurance. That you could advocate for yourself. That's a bigger issue. But and you know what's funny though, if it's any interest to you, I do think there's a major push to get more companies to cover it in Canada as well, because I actually spoke to a company. It's a private equity fund that's looking to create fertility benefit company within Canada. I don't know how much that helps you, but I still think if it's through your company, the same advice applies. But Canada is I know it's a little bit more complicated because I think it's more commoditized because, again, from what I recall, it's in certain areas where you have to be a certain age, you have to have done IUI, you could never have done IVF before. If you hunt me down, though, again, I gave my Twitter information and what is it, my Instagram. Contact me, Lily, and I'll look into it and I'll get you an answer. Or I can give you my email address. I don't know how to do that, but I will find you an answer. I'm on the case.
Awesome. You can also send the information. We'll forward everything to Jennifer. So this is also the case. We can do that.
Because I do have contacts there, and I will look into that because this is research I'm working on now, and this is important. So I will find out.
Yeah. Great, and thank you for the advice. The next question, maybe you will know the answer. Which clinic is good in Spain?
Wait! There was an egg donation friends article about this, wasn't there? Just recently. But isn't there a big famous clinic, Valencia, that everyone talks about all the time? That I hear about all the time. There's an embryologist who actually... Wait, I have my phone. I'm going to Google it. But there's a famous clinic in Spain that everyone talks about. But wasn't there, Sophie, didn't you guys just write an article about this?
Yeah, and you can also find all those clinics
on our
site. Yeah, on our website also, eggdonationfriends.com. There are also clinics from Spain there. So, yeah.
No, but I actually also heard about the clinic that you wrote about from an embryologist. But Spain, there's like literally, I think the clinic that you mentioned, there's this embryologist friend I have, and it's like literally known as one of the best IVF clinics. And so when I saw it included in your article, I was like, oh yeah, an embryologist told me about that. So I'm like actually looking at it on my phone. Go to their article and you'll find it. But I've literally heard about the clinic that they mentioned. But Spain, I actually think, because in last year's ESHRA, I hope you all know what ESHRA is, they had it in Barcelona. So Spain is actually, from people I've spoken to, Spain is considered kind of the cutting edge of reproductive technology in a lot of ways because the US can be so conservative. So I actually think you're in a really good location for reproductive technology, if you don't mind me saying so.
Yes, and thank you a lot for this answer. And of course, you can search all those clinics on our website, as Jennifer said.
Yeah, sorry. That wasn't an intentional plug, I swear to God.
The next question, do you have any opinion about test results like embryos? Is the PGS really giving 100% accurate answer about health of embryo?
Such a good question. That is such a good question. So it's so funny. So I was at ASRM in October of this past year, and mosaic embryos is a major, 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 major hot topic. And what's so interesting is it's like breaking news. And for those of you who don't know, who are still tuned in, so mosaic embryos, and I'm going to give you a really simple, basic description. So when PGS testing emerged, and again, it's now called PGTA, but a lot of people still call it PGS. Basically, it was like, hey, there's good embryos and there's bad embryos. There you go. But the more the technology was refined, they actually found this new kind of embryo where it's technically both. It's both good and bad. And that's called mosaic embryos. And there has been so much debate within the reproductive community about whether or not you transfer mosaic embryos. And there have been doctors, clinicians, embryologists, even patients on both sides saying, I've had success with mosaic embryos where they've been transferred and it's been fine. And then there have been stories where they've transferred mosaic embryos and it didn't implant. It wasn't a successful pregnancy. So for me, you're asking if I have an opinion on it, I think the thing is, I still think it's that we don't have a clear answer. The one thing a doctor said that I thought to me at ASRM that I think is a really good point is there have always been mosaic embryos. We just found out about it recently, though. Do you know what I mean? So since the dawn of time, there's been mosaic embryos. We just learned about it recently. We're the only ones who, just caught on to it. So I think what it comes down to is it's something that a patient and a doctor have to decide for themselves. If I take myself as an example, I only had one embryo. So if I found out that my son Michael was a mosaic embryo and they were like, do you want to transfer it? I would have, because I only had one embryo. So I kind of think it might be a case by case basis. If and that's recently there was a whole big piece on it with couples that had twins, and they were both mosaic embryos, and the twins are beautiful girls now. They're like I think 2 years old. And that was kind of the case. It was all they had. They had two mosaic embryos, so it was a choice between not using them and using them. So I kind of think the opinion, again, is if you have nothing but mosaic embryos and you feel comfortable using them and you and your doctor have talked about it, then use them. If you have all these other embryos, let's say you have 10 embryos and 9 of them are deemed chromosomally healthy, and you have this one that's mosaic, then by all means transfer the other 9, not all at the same time, but use the other 9. So I do think it's a case by case basis, but it is really interesting to see what happens, because even doctors I think aren't in agreement about it, but it depends. I mean, like I said, it depends on your age, how many embryos you have, if all you have is mosaic embryos, and how you personally feel about it. But the one thing I can say for certain is I don't think there's a definitive answer at all in the medical community about it. I really don't.
Thank you for the answer. And let's see the next question. Do you know about women around 50 who have succeeded in having babies through IVF with donor eggs and with help of hormones?
Yes. There are, especially with donor eggs, there are clinics that I had worked with where their cutoff age was like maybe 52 to 54. And so there definitely are, I mean, and there's also celebrities who are not open about it, but there are definitely patients who are in their 50s who have used donor eggs. Where, yeah, I mean, if the eggs are a certain age, the uterus, as long as you have a functional uterus, that's fine. It's really the age of the eggs that are always the concern. If you asked me if I knew women who were 50 and got pregnant using their own eggs, that's the way harder question. It's like less than 1%. And I only know, I think like there's like a 49-year-old. I think that's the oldest I've ever heard. And that was here in New York. I think New Hope, Dr. Zhang, and Dr. Norman Gleicher at CHR have both gotten a 49-year-old pregnant using their own eggs. And I think even in those cases, both the eggs may have previously been frozen. But 50-year-olds with IVF using donor eggs, I've definitely heard of that. You could Google that too. Donor eggs, it's a different ball game. I mean, donor eggs, to be clear, there's no guarantee you will definitely get pregnant using donor eggs, but you have a way better chance.
Thank you. And then we have the next one. I've been reading about acupuncture and TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, that they both help with implantation rates, especially for donor egg transplants. But so far, I haven't seen it listed for many clinics. Any info?
Well, it depends on where you're located. There's actually a clinic in California. Well, it's actually a few clinics in California. There's one even in Colorado. Like CCRM, from what I understand, actually they do an egg transfer, and after you do a transfer, they actually have you stay there, and someone can come in and do acupuncture. And even CNY in upstate New York, I think they incorporate acupuncture as well. Generation Next Fertility in New York incorporates some kind of East meets West medicine. Then there's one in California. Hold on, I can think about it in just a second. Oh my God, it's on the tip of my brain. But there are clinics that do incorporate East meets West traditional Chinese medicine within their treatment. You do have to kind of look for them. In terms of acupuncture, it's funny, in the last year, there was this big study that came out that said there was no correlation. And then there was another study that came out and said, well, actually, no, there may be. So there's still some conflicting information on whether or not acupuncture can help. There's also herbs that comes along with acupuncture that some believe can help with implantation. I ultimately, for me, because I actually did acupuncture along with my fertility treatment, my personal stance on it is I don't know if it helps, but it made me so relaxed that who doesn't want that? You know what I mean? So I literally on my third, I think it was my third IVF, I went from my my IVF transfer to my acupuncturist, laid down, she did a treatment, and it was just really relaxing. So again, even with stress and infertility and relaxing and acupuncture, whatever, I'm going to go back to my mantra, which I still stand behind. If it buys you some sanity, then go for it. Again, if you did research, there's no conclusive evidence. You'll find different studies saying different things about acupuncture and implantation, acupuncture and fertility treatment, and stress and fertility. So I just think it really comes down to you. If you feel it'll help you and it'll bring you comfort, then do it. And there are clinics that do incorporate it. Dr. Yellen, that's what it is. Sorry, Dr. Yellen in California. It's called Life IVF. So I knew I got there eventually. But there are clinics, if you search, that do incorporate acupuncture. Again, CCRM in Colorado, Dr. Yellen, Life IVF in California, New Hope, I believe does it, Generation X Fertility, CNY Fertility in New York. There's more, even Albrecht in Denver. So there are some, again, I'm just naming them off the top of my head. I don't know where you're located. Again, you can try to find me afterwards, but you just have to look. Advocate for yourself. Ask the clinics, ask around and say, this is something I'm interested in. Does your clinic do it?
And thank you for the answer and those important words about sanity. And we have the next question in two parts. So,
okay.
What you advise in cryo protocol? And the next part, for example, ultrageston to use before transfer.
Do you mean, well, sorry, I know this is hard because I think you mean the vaginal suppositories. I think that's what you mean. I think that's what you mean. It depends. I mean, it really does depend on your diagnosis and what they're treating for.
Yeah, to have another information.
Yeah, okay.
Progesterone. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny because I did all of that. I've done estrogen priming, which is the patches. I've done the suppositories, and I did the progesterone and oil injections. Like I've done every I've done every estrogen patch there is, or every estrogen injection or progesterone or what have you. Do you mean, well, I'm sorry. So you mean, did it say before or after? Sorry, to go back. Now I'm trying to remember the question. Was it like before, like priming ahead? I'm trying to remember the cryo protocol. Oh, before? If it's before, what they're trying to do, I believe. Oh yeah, to use before transfer. If it's before, well, okay. It depends. So if they're trying to do it before retrieval, but it looks like before transfer. If they're trying to do it before retrieval, they're trying to make the follicles all grow at the same rate to give you as many eggs as possible come retrieval time. Okay, that's one thing. If it's before transfer, it's to help the embryo implant. Okay, to give the best chance of implantation. So that's common protocol. So that all sounds good. So basically, it sounds like they're trying to either again, I'm kind of guessing here what they're going for. It sounds like either they're trying to give you a shot at as many eggs as possible when it comes to retrieval, and or B, to give any embryos they transfer the best lining possible when it comes time to transfer the embryo. So again, they give you progesterone when they transfer the embryo. They do this at standard protocol for IVF. And if the embryo implants, you have to stay on the progesterone for, I think it's 10 to 12 weeks. If it's a negative beta, if you're not pregnant, then you get to go off the progesterone. So it sounds like they're doing the right things. There's been some debate about whether or not the suppositories are as strong or as effective as the progesterone and oil. Again, I don't know. I'm not sure. For me, I'm kind of partial, to be perfectly honest, because the one cycle that worked for me is the one cycle where I did the progesterone and oil, which was kind of old school. But I just like the progesterone and oil. I mean, it was horrible because it's like an oil, and my butt was like lumps. But I just felt like for me, I don't know, the suppositories were just so messy, and I was worried about, I don't know, it just kept coming out. I mean, to be perfectly blunt, but I was more of a fan of the progesterone and oil. However, it does seem like a standard protocol, and that they're doing everything they can to cover all their bases. So, I mean, it sounds like you're being taken care of. I don't know if that helped. God, I hope so.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for the answer. And then the next question, if you have a myoma, 35 on 35 millimeters in top of the uterus, where the baby usually attaches, can you still get pregnant? Have you heard of women who have become pregnant with myomas or endometriosis?
I've heard of that. And I don't know if I've heard of, well, I don't know if I've heard of people getting, well, I've heard of people getting pregnant with endometriosis, but the thing is, there's different surgeries you can do for that, either laparoscopy, or there's another type of surgery that I can't think of right now. But again, I'm not a doctor, nor have I played one on TV. So I guess my question would be, have they talked to you about laparoscopy, or I think it's actually called, I want to say it's something with an M, like a mammectomy. But I don't, again, I'm not sure if I'm getting that right, so please don't quote me on that. But there's a doctor I know of who specializes in endometriosis, and I can't help but wonder if a laparoscopy or surgery would be the best course of action before trying to conceive. And endometriosis is so tricky. Again, it was just Endometriosis Awareness Month, and so I've just read and written so much about this. But there's many, many different options. There's even, oh God, I can't even remember it. I want to look it up now. But there's so many different options to endometriosis. I think there's something called an incision. There's different surgical options. Let me not get into it because I don't want to misquote it. But there's different surgical options that you can do. So what I would recommend is do as much research as possible about your surgery options. And actually, there's a friend of mine who's a major advocate. Her name is Casey Berna. And Google her. It's CASEYBERNA on Instagram. I think she's called here, let me look it up, Endo Advocate. But I think it's something called like incision therapy or something like that. It's called so she's called endo social worker. But here's the thing. I really, especially if you have endometriosis, because like even the actress Lena Dunham like did a hysterectomy, and I know some of my endometriosis advocate friends like wanted to lose their minds because they were like, oh my God, you don't necessarily have to do that. But definitely do some homework, because I think you have surgical options and other options before you get pregnant, and or before you do anything irreversible, I guess is what I'm saying. So I would definitely, you can even tell Casey that I told you to contact her. Again, Casey Berna, there she is. But again, on Instagram, it's Endo Social Worker. And on Twitter, she's, I think Chances Hour, AOUR. But talk to her. But I think it's called like incision surgery or something. Because basically the bottom line is I think you need to get that removed in order to clear everything out to make sure that you have room for the baby. Because if there's something else in there, I just have done laparoscopic to remove the fibroid, not cutting as much.
Yeah.
I've just done laparoscopic to remove the fibroid, not cutting as such. So that are they going to then do an IVF? This is a fun conversation because I'm getting pieces. I've just done laparoscopic actually remove fibroid. The thing is, let me just say this. If you have anything in the uterus like a fibroid, this is just for everyone. If you have like a fibroid, if you have anything in there, your uterus thinks it's more pregnant than it is, and sometimes you can have premature contractions, basically. So ideally, you want to make sure there's nothing affecting its integrity, basically. So that's why you want to make sure you're in a good state. Just in laparoscopy, to remove fibroid, no cutting as such. Well, it's good you had a laparoscopy. I guess so. Basically, if they cleaned everything out, then you should be. I mean, I would think you'd be fine. I guess basically. It's basically. I think that's my answer then. As long as you had a laparoscopy. I guess my concern was if it was still in there, that would be a problem. I hope that helps. I still recommend you get in touch with Casey though, or at least follow her or something.
Yes, and thank you for the recommendation. Of course, this is also the issue which need to be dive in deeper. But anyway, I think that you answer as much as possible.
Yeah, sorry.
If anybody has any more question, please type them in because we will be slowly finishing. In the meantime, we can have a shout out. Thank you. Love your recommendation. So
I love RuPaul.
Yeah, you definitely helped us, Jennifer, with all your answers and recommendations.
Thank you.
If anybody has any questions, we will be slowly finishing, so please type them in. And Jennifer, if you want to add anything before we will end, just do this.
Just thank you, and really again, I this is something I'm very passionate about, and feel free if there's anything you want to ask me offline. Again, my Twitter handle is the 2 week wait. It's THE, the number 2, the word week and wait. And then on Instagram, it's JENNJAYPAL. I really, like I said, I'm sort of a geek. This is something I've become to really care about, and I'm always around and happy to help.
I've just also put our email, and if you write to our email anything, we will forward this to Jennifer. You can be sure about that, and Jennifer will have all your questions and information from you directly. Of course, also follow Jennifer because she is a great speaker, a motivational speaker also, and she also supports.
And blunt, very blunt.
Yeah, I don't see any questions more, so we will be finishing. And thank you, Jennifer. It was a great pleasure to have you here today. And thank you for the presentation and also sharing your story, and for all the support, for all the questions and participation of you all today. Tomorrow, the rewatch will be available on our website. So if you need to watch it again or share it with anybody who needs to see the webinar with Jennifer, please do that. You can also follow us on social media channels and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you will be always on time. And once again, thank you all. So Jennifer, the final words from you, if you have anything to add.
No, just thank you again so much for joining and making the time. I really, really appreciate it. I really do. And thank you for such great questions. Thank you so much.
It will be a wrap So Jennifer, one more time, big, huge thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.